It's not about not working. This is what I tell everyone I meet who has not heard about FIRE or FI much before. It is not about not working. It is about control over your life. If you are financially independent, then you get to dictate what you do, like broadly across your entire life. I really wanted that control over my life, especially since we wanted to have another kid, and we did. And so when our kid number 2 came along, my wife dropped down to half-time. And then about 6 months later, I also dropped to 0 time. And then I went back to work half-time this spring. It's a perfect application of FI. We decided that we were going to do something different, and it gave us the ability to do so without stressing about money.
Welcome to the Personal Finance for PhDs podcast, a higher education in personal finance. This podcast is for PhDs and PhDs-to-be who want to explore the hidden curriculum of finances to learn the best practices for money management, career advancement, and advocacy for yourself and others. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Roberts, a financial educator specializing in early career PhDs and founder of Personal Finance for PhDs. This is Season 17, Episode 9, and today my guest is Dr. Corwin Olson, who completed his PhD in aerospace engineering and achieved financial independence, FI, just a handful of years later. Corwin argues that using a traditional IRA is typically advantageous over a Roth IRA, even for a grad student, if they have aspirations to retire early in the 0% marginal income tax bracket. Corwin and I walk step by step through his family's finances and his money mindset from the time he finished his master's in 2009 with a $0 net worth to when they reached FI in 2021. Corwin tried out unemployment during the pandemic, but ultimately returned to work a part-time schedule because he still wants to use his engineering skills professionally. Corwin's story highlights how a PhD can achieve a highly satisfying job and work-life balance through a combination of financial freedom and career capital. This spring, I'm bringing back my 15-minute introductory calls. This is a chance for you and I to meet one-on-one. I want to hear your current financial questions and challenges. If I can provide some quick value by answering a question or pointing you to a resource, I absolutely will. These calls are a way for me to keep a pulse on what's going on financially in our community so that I can address whatever comes up through my seminars for universities and the free content I create. I used to offer these calls years ago to everyone who joined my mailing list, and they were so fun and valuable to both of us. I would love to meet you, so please sign up today at pfforphds.com/intro. By the way, we're taking a short break from publishing podcast episodes between Season 17 and Season 18. You can expect the next episode to drop on June 3rd, 2024. You can find the show notes for this episode at pfforphds.com/S17E9. Without further ado, here's my interview with Dr. Corwin Olson. I am delighted to have joining me on the podcast today Dr. Corwin Olson of Engineering Your FI. Corwin is a PhD in aerospace engineering, and he is now financially independent. And we met just a couple of weeks ago. We're recording this in November 2023. We met at FinCon 2023, which happened in late October. And we ran into each other first at the taxes subgroup interest area, and I saw his name and he saw mine, and we knew we had to connect further. So I'm just really excited to have a fellow engineer, PhD, on the podcast who is excited about personal finance and specifically FIRE. We're going to learn a lot from Corwin today. So Corwin, will you please just introduce yourself and your family to us a little bit further?
Sure. Married, family, 2 kids, young, on the wing side, 2 and 7. Born in Dallas, Texas, but I've lived in Texas most of my life. So I'm currently in Austin, Texas. Got my bachelor's and master's at UT Austin, University of Texas at Austin, aerospace engineering, back in the aughts. And I also was fortunate enough as an undergraduate to become a certified NASA instructor. So that was a lot of fun. Got a lot of good leadership and speaking skills from that. Worked to Washington, D.C. for a few years and worked at a company that did navigation for a big NASA mission, which was a lot of fun. Went back for my PhD in 2012. same school, UT Austin. And I worked on autonomous optical navigation around small bodies like asteroids and comets. I then finished up my PhD in 2016 and continued on with UT as a researcher in one of the labs here at UT. And it was towards the second half of my PhD program, and then after getting my PhD, that I got a lot more interested in personal finance and FIRE and discovered that whole community.
Emily here, breaking in during the editing process. Since Corwin and I are about to jump into some heavy financial nerd speak, I want to take a second here to define some terms for new listeners. 1, FIRE stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early, and FI stands for Financial Independence. People in the FIRE movement strive for early financial independence so that they have the option to stop working. And by early, I mean perhaps in your 30s or 40s. 2, an IRA is an individual retirement arrangement, and it is a tax break that the federal government offers to incentivize investing for retirement. In 2024, you can invest up to $7,000 in an IRA if you're under age 50 and have taxable compensation. When you open an IRA, you can choose a traditional version or a Roth version or both. With a traditional IRA, you get an income tax break on the money you contribute in the year of your contribution. The money then grows tax-free, and you pay ordinary income tax on the withdrawals in retirement. With a Roth IRA, you pay your full income tax on your contribution, and then the money grows income tax-free, and you withdraw it income tax-free in retirement. The standard advice is to contribute to Roth accounts when you're in your lower earning years and a relatively low income tax bracket, and switch to traditional when in your higher earning years and a relatively high income tax bracket. Okay, back to the interview.
Now, you said something very provocative to me at FinCon, which was that, I may butcher what you said, but it was something on the lines of pretty much everybody should just be using traditional retirement accounts. And maybe you were saying that in the context of people who are interested in pursuing FI. Can you restate what caught my attention during our conversation?
Well, I think my main motivation was to emphasize how much better traditional is than a lot of people think. They think, oh, I want to pay my taxes now, it might be larger later. And from everything I've read for lots of different places, especially in the FIRE community, if you do the math, it consistently shows that traditional seems to come out on top.
Of course, my follow-up question to you at that time was, well, what about the grad students, Corwin? Mm-hmm. So that is what you have worked on in the few weeks since we left FinCon preparing for this interview. So let's talk now about a grad student kind of specific scenario. So we're talking about someone who's in graduate school. We're going to make the assumption that they're in the 12% marginal tax bracket. I've always kind of said virtually every grad student I've ever spoken with, if they're investing in an IRA, they're using a Roth. It's just like the popular option by far. And there's reasons for that, which we'll go into. But you were just going to do the math for us. So yeah, please tell us now like the scenarios that you were looking at and kind of the outcomes and where people can read your full post about this.
Sure. So I did this most recent blog post on engineeringyourfi.com, traditional Roth versus traditional IRA contributions in the grad school. And I put the Python code that I used to generate all these results in the post. You can go download it, take a look. I know a lot of grad students know Python, so that's good. The broad strokes conclusion is generally, what people have said for many, many years, it all depends on your input versus output tax rates, right? So if you are 100% confident that you're going to be withdrawing your money in a 24% marginal tax bracket later in life, and you're in grad school now and you're in the 12% tax bracket, then yeah, you should just put it into Roth if you're totally sure of that. Right? But I think what I like to push for is that actually, especially if you're at all interested in financial independence at an early age, retiring early, taking sabbaticals, then actually it can make a lot more sense to go after traditional, because it is actually a lot more feasible to have a 0% tax bracket as a fired person, early retired person, by taking advantage of the standard deduction and the really large, typically 0% long-term capital gains bracket. So I did a lot of plots, and I showed, not just the values of the traditional versus Roth, which is deceptive, right? Because you haven't paid taxes on the traditional, but also the cash out value of each. And there's some really cool nuances and fluctuations. After you hit 60 or 59.5, things simplify a lot, right? There's no 10% penalty. But in general, I still would prefer traditional, because I think with our expense levels, we can very easily have a 0% tax bracket, and it's quite beneficial for us to go do that. So a lot more detail in the post, though.
Yeah, so what I was kind of thinking through when I was looking at these results here, which are basically like, well, okay, you're looking at your 12% current marginal tax bracket that you would presumably be paying as a graduate student versus when you want to withdraw from this account, maybe that's before retirement age, maybe that's after. What is your marginal tax rate going to be then? You looked at three assumptions, which was 0, as you've just been mentioning, 24%, and also 12%. And once you actually pay the tax on this money, once you get it out of the traditional account, it was even, right? Just as good if you were withdrawing it in the 12% tax bracket, right? Same. If you manage to get down at that 0% tax bracket, then there's a clear advantage for the traditional. And if you're managing to be withdrawing money in the 24% tax bracket, there's an advantage for the Roth. But what I was thinking about, and maybe what could be a thought exercise for the listener, is what is your tax bracket going to be in retirement? Because when you say something like 24%, like that might be your tax bracket in your peak, earning years, working years for your family, something in that range. But a lot of people live on much less money in retirement. That is to say, they have to withdraw much less money than they were earning because maybe they had a high savings rate going on. Maybe their expenses have dropped later in life because their kids are out of the house or whatever the reason is. So it's very hard to sort of predict what is your tax bracket going to be later in life? Is it going to be as high as it is in your working years? Is it definitely going to be lower? And especially sitting from the position of a grad student when you don't really know what your career is going to be. So definitely, like, for those of you who want to nerd out about tax rates and would be open to the possibility of maybe not doing a Roth IRA during grad school, maybe doing the traditional, definitely check out Corwin's post at Engineering Your FI. But I want to talk further now about your personal story and why for you that 0% tax bracket, the traditional would have been the better choice, is something that you have achieved in this at a relatively early age. So yeah, let's talk more about your personal story. So you told us earlier that you worked for several years before pursuing your PhD. You weren't into the FIRE movement at that time. So were you doing things like contributing to your tax advantage retirement accounts, or was it something you didn't even think about at that time?
Yeah, so I was fortunate to get my master's in 2009, went down to a net worth of $0 because I spent all my savings going through a big backpacking trip. But my uncle sent me this article, snail mail, of course, back in 2009, and it's my uncle. And it was this money article about how you should invest in index funds. And I'm like, okay, what are these things? The markets had just crashed, they were very low valuations. So I was like, I should probably do this. At the very least, I wanted to match my 401k from my employer, right? And my wife had started working around the same time. So we did that, but we also had to save for a wedding, and we lived in Washington, D.C., very expensive. So at the time, we were not focused on maxing out our savings rate, but we did know we needed to start investing. And that paid off quite heavily because the markets were so down when we started our careers. We were lucky to get jobs in 2009, right? When the economy was suffering heavily. So, yeah. We were fortunate.
So you had a savings rate.
Yeah, right. I don't even know what it was. It was definitely under 50%. So.
Okay, so let's kind of fast forward to when you started your PhD. I think you said that was 2012, right?
Yes.
And so what was your mindset like at that time around, I'm presuming you took a pay cut, right? But maybe your wife maintained her income. Just talk us through kind of the shift in household finances that occurred when you started your PhD.
Sure. So I was very fortunate that because of my work experience and grades and all that, I was able to get this really nice NASA fellowship. And I also was able to get a really nice UT fellowship. So I made a pretty nice salary in graduate school, $45K a year. So it is possible to do that for the folks who are listening out there. It's not super common. Usually you're looking at closer to 20K, although maybe that number's higher now because of inflation. But you can make a bit more money with these fellowships. That's why I strongly encourage all grad students to go after them. But yeah, I was more into minimalism back then because I didn't know about FIRE, and so I thought, okay, maybe this is how I need to live my life, be minimalist. But yeah, it was still, finances were always on a back burner still at that point.
So you were still saving, but it was not a major focus until a few years later. Is that right?
Right.
Okay, so let's talk about when you were finishing your PhD, what was going on with your family overall, and then how your finances changed when you got that post-PhD job.
We were pregnant with my first child, and so he was born 3 months before my dissertation, which was quite rough. And my wife and I are thinking about what we wanted to do after I got my degree, and she was enjoying her job. She wanted to continue there. I was thinking about a business, small business. Thought I might do something entrepreneurial. And it was when I discovered the FI movement. It was a Mr. Money Mustache article, as it is for so many people, that really launched me down that community path to find out about all of that. And then I realized, actually, I think that's what I want most out of life right now. So I was fortunate that there was a high-paying engineering job that I could take here in Austin, a really good lab here. So I decided, well, I think that's what I want. Also, we have a baby coming, and this would be nice to have that stability for that. Maybe a little less stress, a few less hours. I always told people my easy job was going into the office, right? So that was where we decided, okay, let's just do 2 full-time jobs, and let's really ramp up our savings rate. So we ramped it up to, I think on average, about 70%. And one of the reasons I was able to do that is I was very fortunate that I had access to an additional retirement account, 457B, which hopefully some of your listeners are familiar with. So we maxed out that. We maxed out my 403B, my wife's 401k. That helped a tremendous amount with getting to that kind of savings rate. So, yeah.
Wow. I want to probe a little bit further on okay, you've had this career already. You've just finished your PhD and you decide, I don't want to work anymore, or I don't want to have to work anymore in a
Right.
relatively short period of time, right? Because most people, you finish a PhD, you're looking at 30, 40, 50-year career after that point. But that is very antithetical to the MMM mindset. So what exactly was your goal and what was your motivation for pursuing that goal?
So it was really about the latter thing you just said and not the former thing you said. It's not about not working. This is what I tell everyone I meet who has not heard about FIRE or FI much before. It is not about not working. It is about control over your life. If you are financially independent, then you get to dictate what you do, broadly across your entire life. So my wife took advantage of that by essentially creating a new role within her company. She's like, I'm not as enjoying this as much, but I would like to stay with y'all. I like the people I'm working with. I'd rather do this. And they said, oh, okay, well, let's set you up. So she's continued to do that, and she really likes it. And I also really wanted that control over my life, especially since we wanted to have another kid, and we did. And so when our kid number 2 came along, my wife dropped down to half-time. And then about 6 months later, I also dropped to 0 time. And then I went back to work half-time this spring. And we could talk a lot more about that as well. But it's really just, it's a perfect application of FI. We decided that we were going to do something different, and I gave us the ability to do so without stressing about money. So.
This is just a very short timeline. And I know you had been saving since 2009 at a lower rate, but really we're talking 2016 when you started your post-PhD job to, it sounds like about 2021 when you were able to really change your work lives. That's only 5 years. Even the most aggressive FIRE people talk about 10 years, right? And not starting
15.
from 0. Yeah. So this is just, it's just amazing. I know the 70% savings rate, that's what did it, right? That's a really, really high savings rate.
Well,
but I'm just marveling over this short timeline.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the market's really exploded. If it had been a bad or even mediocre market during that time, we would not have done that. It was just because the stock market, we didn't do anything other than bland, vanilla, total stock market index funds. So we didn't pick stocks or anything like that to try to get lucky with, which ones we chose. So it was good fortune as well, big time.
I think in some ways your story is relatable, like you just said, using index funds, no crazy inaccessible investing strategies. Furthermore, as you mentioned earlier, you took a straight W-2 job. You didn't, strike out on your own and start the business. There can be upside to that. There can also be downside. And so in that way, it's relatable. But come on, a 70% savings rate, that's the part that's how are you doing this? So I want you to give me a couple of structural things, how your life is that helps you achieve, or at that time, right, from those incomes you had then, that 70% savings rate. I know you mentioned you use the pre-tax retirement accounts. That's awesome, but it doesn't change your actual spending. So how are you keeping the spending down? Where do you live? What do you drive? These kinds of things.
Yeah, right. So we're fortunate that we live in Austin, Texas, which historically has been a lower cost of living. Now it's changing. We bought our house in 2013, which at the time we thought, oh, this is way too late. We're going to pay so much more money than we would have a year ago or whatever. but our house has doubled in value since then. Our mortgage is so much lower than it would be if we bought in Austin now. And we've also been consistently frugal. We were both raised pretty frugally. So, our 5-year spending, inflation adjusted, is around $50K-ish. So now that does not include daycare. Daycare is something that we do pay for, but that's going to end in like 2 or 3 years. So we kind of set that as lump that together on the side kind of deal. But it's been primarily keeping expenses down. We do a lot of things like travel hacking, which I love, figuring out ways to pay for travel because if we didn't do that, our spending would be significantly higher. And just a variety of things. I'm always optimizing, perhaps obsessively. So yeah, it was something that we were able to just continue to work at. We got Mint Mobile, for example, and that slashed our cell phone bill dramatically. We never even knew about it beforehand, and so it was just consistent. Inflation, things go up, but every year it would kind of go down for us a bit as we found optimizations for various things. Now I think we've pretty plateaued, essentially. We just bought a new roof, so that brought up our spending quite a bit. But yeah, I think that a lot of people are scared by the 50% or higher numbers. And I'm always telling people you should save at least 50% of your income. And I usually get eye rolls or stares or, okay, this guy's like off the wall. I don't know. I'm not listening to him anymore, but which is bad, right? But I think it's still something that I love to see people achieve, or at least work to achieve. Because if you do the math, you've seen it probably before, these various plots like from zero, how long it takes to get to financial independence. If you're at 50%, it's 15 years. So, and higher percentages don't shave that many more years off because of that exponential growth. So I feel like that's a nice sweet spot. Done with mandatory work in a decade and a half, I feel like that really speaks to a lot of people. So I'm always pushing that, try to get to 50%, even if you're not there, try to get there, because you'll gain so much more power over your life so much faster as a result. And that was really what was important to us. That's what motivated us this entire time. Before we discovered FIRE, my wife and I would be like, well, is this important or not? We didn't have like a unifying goal. So, that got us on the same page so much better. So FI is good for your marriage for a lot of reasons, I think. Also, I think, money conflicts are one of the big things that drive a lot of marital stress. So that was another thing that was important to us. So yeah, I don't know if I really answered your question, but we just try to keep expenses down in general.
Yeah, I think the key answer in there was the home purchase in 2013, but furthermore, not upgrading, right? Because I know, this is the temptation when you have your first baby or your second baby is we have to live in a bigger place. We have to drive a bigger car, newer car. Like there's lifestyle inflation that's baked into those like sort of life transition points, family transition points. And so at least with respect to your home, you've clearly avoided that temptation of lifestyle inflation.
It's hard though. We wish we had another room in this house all the time, especially when grandparents come to visit. This is my office / guest room. So, when we've got visitors, I lose my office, and that's annoying, but, it's okay.
Do you think you're going to stay?
Probably. So our son's in elementary school now, and I think if we were to buy a new house, we would probably need to move to a different neighborhood, different area. He'd have to change schools, and it doesn't seem like it's worth it. We've thought about doing an add-on as well. So, especially with interest rates the way they are now. So we're Camp Mortgage, we're Team Mortgage, so we've got a pretty low mortgage as well. So
yeah. So it sounds like you're going to try to find a way to stick it out in the same house and keep that mortgage. That's amazing. Okay, well, I want to talk more about like the benefits you've experienced of the degree of FIRE that you have now, which was, you mentioned that your wife went to half-time, you left your job for a time, now you're back working part-time. Can you just talk about how this FI achievement / the mindset stuff enabled you to find that like satisfaction with your work and the control over how you work?
Yeah, so I was an unemployed bum for a year and a half. And
stay home dad.
I prefer unemployed bum because it gets people like, what? But I think that after a while, I also realized I spent close to 20 years developing all these engineering skills, and it's like I was doing a lot of other projects that were fun. I worked on this site engineering your FI, and that was fun. But I also felt like just felt so wasteful, I guess is the best word, like not use those skills anymore. I missed a lot of the friends I had at the lab that I worked at. And so I had lunch with my boss slash friend, or former boss slash friend from the lab. And, he told me there's some really cool stuff going on. Would you be interested in maybe coming back? So I spoke with him. I spoke with some of the other management, and we agreed on this really nice halftime deal where I always get to leave by 2 o'clock. I always leave by 2 o'clock to pick up my son from school. We bike home from school. That was something I always wanted when I was a kid, to be able to, go home with my parents, bike home, or whatever, right? So I was like, that's very, very important to me. And it's allowed me to continue working on my site, other things, projects, just logistics at home. So it's been really, really nice. My wife is same. She gets to volunteer at the school a lot because she's working half-time. So it's been a really nice balance. I wrote a whole blog post about the pros and cons of half-time, part-time after fire because, mathematically, you don't need to. So I tried to lay out those because I wrote so many pros and cons lists before I went back. So, yeah.
Yeah, I have a similar work schedule. My business allows me to work about half-time, same as you. I work kind of while my kid is in school, and then we get the latter part of the afternoon together, which, that flexibility is kind of like invaluable as a parent, honestly. Like, it's very, very difficult once your kids get into elementary school to figure out how you're going to run everything if you have like 2 traditional 9 to 5 like schedules. So I definitely see the appeal there. But like I was just saying, there's multiple ways you can achieve this, right? Business ownership, working part-time, being totally FI, maybe just having an alternative kind of work schedule, like all these different possibilities are there. But the more, as you were saying earlier, the more kind of confidence you have that you don't need your job in exactly the format that you have it right now, the more that gives you the ability to negotiate for what would really work for you, which is so beautiful. So you don't have to be all the way to FI to get there. You happen to be, but you can just be like on the path and be secure enough that you can take a risk with that kind of ask.
Yeah. I talk, one of the other articles on my site is something called Flamingo Fire, Flamingo Fi, which I was a big fan of the first time I heard of it. It originally came from a blogger in Australia, actually. And when I first encountered that, I thought, this is a great balance of FI versus not being so aggressive with your savings early on. Their philosophy was save up to halfway to the 5 point and then work however much you need to cover expenses. And then about a decade or so, you'll be traditional FI. So it's more aggressive than Coast FI, less aggressive than standard FI. And so I thought, that's a really nice balance. And so I feel like we're kind of the fat Flamingo FI version because we're at standard FI or closer to that. But with these half-time jobs, we more than cover our expenses, and we expect, probably within, half a decade or so, something like that, we'll probably be more at the fat FI level, whatever that means. So, it's nice to have these different levels and different ways to have power over your life. Big time.
I'm thinking about the phrase, live like a grad student, live like a resident, live like you're still a trainee even afterwards. Now, I think that really applies in your case because you had the very nice stipend. I mean, $45K in 2012 is like really, really, I was making like $28K in 2012. You have that like nicer sort of level of income while you were in graduate school, plus your wife's job and everything. But it sounds like you probably about maintained your lifestyle. Even with increases in income, aside from the additional expenses for childcare and so forth that come with the kids. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, roughly. If anything, we lowered it because we found various ways to stop wasting money on things like cell phone bills and other things. I found that you could call these companies that could compare your insurance rates across a whole bunch of different companies and always found us the lowest rate, et cetera, et cetera. It's like the more knowledge you gain, the faster the snowball starts, right? So that was a big thing that I always try to keep in mind inflation as well, because sometimes it's going up, but you're still doing good compared to inflation, especially recently. But yeah, we definitely strove to not inflate after the PhD, for sure.
Emily here for a brief interlude. Would you like to learn directly from me on a personal finance topic such as taxes, goal setting, investing, frugality, increasing income, or student loans, each tailored specifically for graduate students and postdocs? I offer seminars and workshops on these topics and more in a variety of formats, and am now booking for the 2024-2025 academic year. If you would like to bring my content to your institution, would you please recommend me as a speaker or facilitator to your university, graduate school, graduate student association, or postdoc office? My seminars are usually slated as professional development or personal wellness. Orientations, or very close to the start of the academic year, would be a perfect time for tax education or general personal finance content. Ask the potential host to go to pfforphds.com/financial-education or simply email me at emily@pfforphds.com to start the process. I really appreciate these recommendations, which are the best way for me to start a conversation with a potential host. The paid work I do with universities and institutions enables me to keep producing this podcast and all my other free resources. Thank you in advance if you decide to issue a recommendation. Now back to our interview.
Since you were just mentioning, we were just talking about your excellent stipend and so forth, you have a book, right, that's relevant to graduate students. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So this is something I wrote back in 2019. It's called Engineering Your PhD, an actual guide to earning your graduate degree in engineering. I had looked around online and I found books that were written for PhDs and how to get your PhD the best, but not a lot for engineering. There's like maybe one or two others. And I had all this knowledge in my brain from when I got my PhD about how to do various things that I really wished I'd known before I started graduate school. So it was really more of like a passion project, like, let's get this into a more permanent form. Something I can hand to my kids one day if they want to go to graduate school and say, hey, engineering at least, this is the collection of things that I thought were important when I finished up. So yeah, it's on Amazon now. And I will say it's not really my focus anymore to focus on academia. I'm much more interested in FI and FIRE and personal finance and things like that. It's been a while since I was in academia now. That's hard to believe. But yeah, it's still, I think, a well-written book, according to my very biased opinion. So if anyone's interested in interested in checking that out, you're certainly welcome to.
Editing Emily breaking in again. Corwin is very generously offering Engineering Your PhD free for download for 5 days after the publication of this interview. If you'd like to grab it, please go to pfforphds.com/S17E9 and you'll see the Amazon link in the list of links near the start of the show notes. Okay, back to the interview.
So thanks for telling us about the book. I want to ask one more question before we get to our final one, which is what does the future look like, right? You're at FI, maybe you're going to continue building towards a fatter version of FI. You have your half-time work schedule. Like, do you anticipate making any changes, or are you just going to cruise to traditional retirement age at this? Like, what do you think?
I don't know. That's a good question. So for the foreseeable future, we're going to continue doing our part-time roles. I think that's a good balance for us with young kids right now. But things could change in the future. Maybe we decide we want to actually ramp up. We want to strengthen our careers. We want to get more into what we're doing in our jobs. Maybe we want to go the opposite direction and do less or focus on entrepreneurial activities. We live here in Austin, Texas, where it gets very warm in the summertime. So I think we've toyed around with the idea of living elsewhere during the summer times when the kids are out of school. So that's something that might be of interest to us, but that's more like the summertime versus the rest of the entire year. So we could take sabbaticals from our part-time roles for a couple months, get out of the heat, and then come back. That sounds really nice. And then who knows, once my daughter graduates from high school in 16 years, then, the world's our oyster. We might go elsewhere. We might go to Colorado, or depending how hot the earth is at that point, we may have to go further north. So yeah, we'll have to see what happens.
Okay. I just love how calm and chill that answer was. Just I don't know, we're doing fine. We'll see where it goes. We'll do what we want. And that's really what FIRE affords you, especially FIRE in, professional fields like you have, where you have so much career capital, as Cal Newport would say by this point. You can deploy it in different ways, right? So I love that. Okay, so let's get to our standard question. What is your best financial advice for another early career PhD? It could be something that we've touched on already in the interview, or it could be something completely new.
So a few things that are very standard boilerplate pieces of advice. Well, maybe one's not so much. First thing is track your expenses. I mean, if you're not tracking your expenses, that is the foundation for everything. If you have no idea how much you're spending, then you're not going to be able to make almost any progress on lots of different things, especially if you want to pursue financial independence. Because that's going to tell you how much money you need to save. That's going to tell you your savings rate is, all kinds of things. And you're not going to be able to reduce it if you don't know how much you're spending. Another thing is, like I mentioned earlier, I'm always pushing for a 50% savings rate. If not currently, then aspirationally trying to get there, because it's such a powerful thing for your finances and getting to financial independence within a couple decades. Also a big fan of not getting complicated with investments. Put everything into a low-cost stock market index fund like VTSAX. First thing I do when I look at a fund is go straight to the expense ratio. That's the first thing I do. But the last thing I would say is maybe a little less traditional, which is I encourage people to build their own tracking systems, their own financial tracking systems. There's so many tools out there, just an infinite number of tools you can pop your numbers into and get all these different things. But I feel like if you do your own thing, you're building the skills up to track your finances, that you have an ultimate customization for what you actually want, right? Even if it's just spreadsheets, right? That's perfectly fine. It's usually free. You're not paying anything. Again, that's good for your savings rate, right? But I do recommend trying out some other tools as well to see if the numbers line at least closely or roughly. So yeah, that's be my top pieces of finance advice for grad students.
I really love, but the first and the last one, right? Track and also build your own tool for doing so and doing more than just tracking. Because at the moment that we're recording this, finance internet is abuzz because Mint has announced they are shutting down their budgeting feature, and they're kind of transitioning over, I think, completely to Credit Karma stuff. So I've been a Mint user for 13 or 14 years now. And not that I've been completely reliant on it, but to the degree that I have my own stuff going on, I'm really happy for that now. Because now I'm like, okay, what do? I have to download all this data. It's going to be unusable CSV files. What is going to happen with this track record? So, but as you were saying, there's other great tools out there. You Need a Budget is so popular, but there is a yearly fee to it. And so if you don't want to have that kind of subscription, build your own stuff. It's not, I don't know, it's not that complicated. I guess it depends on how great you are with spreadsheets and stuff. But so I love that advice of just be ready for these services to shut down on you. It's literally happening to me at this moment. Yeah. So don't be totally reliant on outside, apps and so forth.
I think if you're smart enough to get into a decent graduate program, then I think you're smart enough to create a spreadsheet that can track your finances, at least at a crude level, that you can be fully in control of. So, yeah.
Yeah. I'll take the opportunity to plug something of mine in the show notes. I've literally not announced this on the podcast yet as of this recording, but I made a simple Excel spending tracker that incorporates a couple of my philosophies about how to manage money, which are to spend what you earned last month. Don't spend what just came in, wait until the next month to spend it. And also to incorporate sinking funds or targeted savings into that system. So I don't know, people asked me for a long time, if I could just send them a simple spending tracker. And I finally made one a few weeks ago in response to someone at a speaking engagement who wanted it. So go to pfforphds.com/tracker. If you want to download that and take it and make it your own and build it out and have it do other things and take my ideas, discard my ideas, whatever you like. But if you want a starting point, there's a starting point for you. Corwin, it's been such a fascinating conversation. I'm so excited for how your life is unfolding and how the PhD has played a role in that. It's so excellent. And thank you so much for sharing your story with the audience and coming on the podcast.
Thanks very much.
Listeners, thank you for joining me for this episode. I have a gift for you. You know that final question I ask of all my guests regarding their best financial advice? I have collected short summaries of all the answers ever given on the podcast into a document that is updated with each new episode release. You can gain access to it by registering for my mailing list at pfforphds.com/advice. Would you like to access transcripts or videos of each episode? I link the show notes for each episode from pfforphds.com/podcast. See you in the next episode, and remember, you don't have to have a PhD to succeed with personal finance, but it helps. Nothing you hear on this podcast should be taken as financial, tax, or legal advice for any individual. The music is Stages of Awakening by Poddington Bear from the Free Music Archive and is shared under CC by NC. Podcast editing by Dr. Lourdes Bobbio and show notes creation by Dr. Jill Hoffman.